Hi there, I'm Claire Feldman and I help women overcome emotional and binge eating and find freedom from food once and for all. And in this short video today, I'm going to be talking to you about managing your eating and your stress around eating at Christmas time. And this is such a common issue that if you already have maybe a really poor relationship with food and you're a chronic dieter and always on and off diets, Christmas can be a really worrying time because there's a lot of fear that gets built up around the wheels coming off and going into kind of full scale binge behavior. So I wanted to give you some maybe practical advice around how to manage this Christmas differently from maybe previous years. So my first tip is around ensuring that you actually do try to maintain some kind of regular and balanced eating over the holiday time. And this is a really common time, and what people will often do is they will think, well, I know I'm going to have a really big meal later on, and I know I'm going to have all of this chocolate and all of these treats and puddings and all of this kind of stuff. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to save all my calories for later, and I'm not going to eat anything during the day. I understand the rationale of doing that, but what that actually does is just kind of sends us into the restrict and binge kind of patterns. So when you get to later on in the day and you're going to have that meal, you are likely to consume way more in terms of quantities than what you would normally do had you have actually just had your breakfast and had your lunch through the day. The chances are that you possibly would have consumed more, because by the time you get to that meal, you're so ravenous, you are likely to then just, the wheels come off and go for it and eat way beyond the point of fullness. So regardless of what it is you're going to be eating over the Christmas period, I would still recommend that you try to maintain balanced meals, breakfast, lunch and dinner, to keep your blood sugar stable and to, I suppose, reduce the likelihood of you going into being overly hungry and over consuming. When it comes to Christmas time, it's really common that we do have this kind of all or nothing mindset around food. And I will stress here that Christmas is not a time when you should be, thinking about calories or obsessing about weight gain or feeling guilty. Most importantly, you should not be feeling guilty over your food choices. So that's not what this video is about, but it is possible to get through Christmas without feeling like you have gone to extremes and be full of self-loathing kind of afterwards. So the all or nothing mindset with people who really struggle with their relationship with food, how this will come into play is it's Christmas time, so we have to eat all of the food and get it all out of the way now because we're not going to eat this again for another year. And when we have that kind of mindset around food, we're in scarcity mindset. And when we're in scarcity mindset, our brain is then telling us that everything in the house has to be consumed, and we will often then buy in loads of foods that ordinarily we wouldn't eat. So what I want you to have a think about is we're not actually in a scarcity situation, and food really is abundant. And if you did really want to, have a Christmas dinner, there's no reason why you couldn't have a Christmas dinner at any time of the year. Or if you really wanted to, you could probably get some mince pies or make yourself a Christmas cake or all of these, buy yourself tins of sweets. You really could do that at any time of year if you really wanted to. So there isn't actually a scarcity, and you don't actually have to have every food associated with Christmas and consume every food associated with Christmas over the holiday period. So what I would really invite you to do is to change that kind of mindset that perhaps you have at the minute, which is I must eat all of this food, to I can choose whether to have this food or not. So when you're sitting down, for example, to have a meal, and what we maybe are doing is we're eating it all, and yes, it's lovely and it's delicious, but we're eating it all because it's almost like, well, it's Christmas time, so I'm going to do this because I'm not going to do it again. Change that I must eat it or I have to eat it to I can choose to. There's no reason why you couldn't have it another time. There's no reason why you can't have it the next day. So putting that choice into it reduces that feeling of have to and that drive that you must then eat all of it. So just remember, food is abundant. There is not a scarcity here, and I can choose whether to have these foods or not to have these foods, and I can choose to have these foods at any time. The next thing that I would really get you to try and have a think about is making decisions in the moment, on a moment-to-moment basis, and really thinking about what choice feels right for you and feels good for you in that particular moment. So if, for example, if you're used to having kind of diet mentality, or being in a dieting mindset, you might be kind of used to looking at your food from a control perspective or from a calorie perspective, and you might engage in kind of the dialogue where you're thinking, right, okay, well, I ate that food earlier on, so I really can't have that food twice because that's going to be too many calories and that's going to throw me over, or I'm going to feel really guilty if I eat that. That if you're in that kind of mindset of making decisions from a control and restrict perspective, you're more likely to then get caught in those kind of cycles of restrict and binge. When I talk about making decisions that feel right for you on a moment-to-moment basis, that might look like, okay, so all the family are sitting down together and we're all enjoying a glass of Bailey's and a mince pie. That actually, rather than looking at that perspective from a, oh my God, Bailey's is really creamy and it's so many calories in it and mince pies are just so fattening, rather than looking at it from that perspective, that there's an experience being shared there and you're creating memories, and that is a joyous, pleasurable experience. So although from a nutritional perspective, it's less than ideal, actually from a nourishing, from a pleasurable, from an enjoyment, satisfaction and nourishing kind of yourself and your soul, that is the right decision for you to make at that time, and that there should be no guilt attached to that eating. And it's often the guilt attached to the eating that sends us into sabotage and sends us into restrictive and knee-jerk type of reactions. So it might be that you enjoying that Bailey's and that mince pie in that moment is the perfect decision for you to make, but that may not be the perfect decision for you to make the next day, because maybe you're sitting on your own, or you're feeling really angry, or you're feeling lonely, or you're feeling some kind of negative emotion and you want to knee-jerk into eating that food. That the next day that may not be the right decision. So rather than making your decisions from that control perspective on a moment-to-moment basis, you're making a decision based on, how is this going to make me feel? Does it feel right for this moment? Is it going to nourish me in some way, either physically or emotionally? And is it something, how is it going to make me feel after I've had it? So in some situations, this is good for me. I'm enjoying this moment. I'm with my family and I feel connected, and this is a good choice. On another occasion, actually, this isn't going to make me feel good. It's not going to fill me up. Actually, I know this makes me feel really groggy after I've had it, so I'm not going to eat that. So try to make your decisions on a moment-to-moment basis. And when you've had something that maybe is less nourishing, or something that you wouldn't ordinarily eat, just eat it and move on. Tomorrow is another day, and you just treat that day on the moment-to-moment basis as well. So it's really important that, over Christmas, if you do, which let's face it, you are going to, and we are all going to, if you overconsume, you eat beyond the point of fullness, or even if you engage in a full-on binge for you, do not knee-jerk into restricting yourself or starving yourself or punishing yourself with grueling workouts the next day. It's happened, and just move on. And something I really want you to have a think about, if it's not something you've explored before about your relationship with food, just think about, how often do you engage in that restrict and binge pattern? Because it is that is kind of, it's holding you prisoner. It is that is keeping you stuck. And when you're in that kind of pattern of I'm going to restrict and restrict and restrict, and I'm trying to be really good, and I'm trying to eat clean, or I'm trying to eat low calorie, or I'm trying to lose weight, it is inevitable that that pattern will always lead to then a binge behavior. And a binge behavior tends to have a knock-on effect then of feeling very critical and self-loathing and full of guilt or full of shame, and that leads us to then engage in kind of the punishing or restrictive behaviours that send us right back to that pattern again. So if it's not something you've ever looked at or not something you've ever explored before, I would get you to really kind of reflect on that. And in particular for over the Christmas period, if you recognise that over Christmas you tend to overconsume and binge, for a whole kind of 2 or 3 week period, and then January you go into these crazy detox and diets and restriction and calorie counting, and it ends, you always end up back in the same place. Really think about this year approaching this differently. Approaching it with balance, approaching it with a moment-to-moment decision of what feels right for me to eat in these moments. Remembering there is no food scarcity here. We're in a food abundance, so you can choose whether to have these foods or to not have these foods. And immediately when there is a choice over whether you're going to have these foods or not have these foods, you may feel like a weight is kind of lifted off your shoulders around that. So I hope you have found this video helpful. If you're interested in any other information, you'll find some links below to a free Facebook group that I have that's specifically for women who struggle with emotional and binge eating. And there's also a couple of links below to some free resources of mine. So I hope you enjoy, and I hope you have a happy, healthy Christmas. Take care.